Thank you, Mr. President. Again, as we had indicated at the last instance, that we intend now to move swiftly through the brief debates relating to the state of public emergency. In that regard, Mr. President, I will open the debate and then invite my colleagues to make their contribution. As we also acknowledge our leader of government business, who has been, Mr. President, attempting to be omnipresent. I don't know how she does it, but she's here as leader, she's elsewhere as leader, and then also dual capacity actually, and elsewhere as president. And so we take the time to acknowledge her stellar work and also to congratulate her for what has been a resoundingly successful, 25th session of the International Seabed Authority, of which she has presided over on behalf of Jamaica. And we are grateful. Yes, for the first time. For the first time.
Senator, before you continue, I just want to add that many diplomats were extremely praiseworthy of your management and chairing of yesterday's session. I add my congratulations.
Mr. President, colleagues, we are called upon once again to contemplate these matters of national importance. We are confronted with the realities, the existing realities of crime that have led us to once again request further extensions of the enhanced security measures in several areas across our country. As a Senate, we have, despite our sometimes opposing views, been able to achieve a consensus in moving forward to implement measures that are effective in taking control of our spaces and saving lives. Undoubtedly, Mr. President, these measures of which we seek support may very well create some hindrance, but more importantly, they've been proven in this judicious balance to exceptionally save lives, and we have to focus on that. As you know, Mr. President, there can be no freedom or human right to protect without life. And that in no way means that we don't have this obligation to respect freedoms and human rights, but what it means is that we are not trying to curtail freedom, Mr. President. We are trying to deliver freedom to the people. Freedom from fear. Freedom from the monster, which is crime and violence in our country. Mr. President, we seek the Senate's approval for the extension of the state of public emergency for the tri-parish region of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover, as has been ratified in the lower house earlier this week. And we do so acknowledging, Mr. President, that the premature discontinuation of these bold actions is destructive to our citizens, our communities, and to our country, as stated by our Prime Minister. Mr. President, so long as the emergency situation exists, the extraordinary solutions will be relevant and required. This is not a measure, Mr. President, of time, but rather a measure of circumstances.
Senator Charles, one small housekeeping matter.
Yes.
You must move that the standing orders be suspended to take this motion because it was tabled today.
I'm guided by your wisdom, Mr. President, and so I will move retroactively.
Yes.
So that the standing orders be suspended for me to take the motion of which I gave notice earlier today.
Continue, sir.
As I said, Mr. President, the measure must be seen not just in the quantification of time, but rather as a measure of circumstances. Currently, our circumstances present a perpetual state of emergency that must be addressed until it is normalized. Mr. President, our bold efforts to protect this country, our country, requires a firm resolve, and for us all to remain persistent and true to the task of ensuring the society is safe, secure, cohesive, and just. Mr. President, we have to acknowledge our Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, who advised that we are advanced in executing Plan Secure Jamaica. A plan, Mr. President, which will target a reduction in murders below the regional average of 16 per 100,000. That's under 500 per year. And the state of emergency must be seen within this context and understood as one of the elements of this comprehensive plan. A plan that has to be viewed within the context of the 5-pillar strategy that has been articulated time and time again. A plan that must be viewed, Mr. President, within the context of the allocations that have been exceptional and that are historic allocations that demonstrate a clear priority placed on our national security by this administration. A plan, Mr. President, that strengthens the national security architecture by bolstering the entire apparatus and improving institutions that are charged with coordination, monitoring, management, oversight, and policy making, thereby ensuring greater public safety and more effective measures. A plan, Mr. President, to strengthen the criminal justice system geared towards providing swift and just outcomes and therefore providing a meaningful deterrence to criminal and antisocial behavior. A plan, Mr. President, to encourage youth and community engagements to address some of the root causes of crime and corruption, primarily through social development initiatives. A plan, Mr. President, to strengthen, protect, and secure Jamaica's borders, maritime space, and key sectors of our economy by implementing activities that would protect the agricultural enterprises from predatory larceny and fisheries from poaching. A plan, Mr. President, to strengthen the national integrity system in order to reduce corruption through mechanisms of greater detection, stronger deterrence, along with other influences geared at transformational behavior change. A plan, importantly, Mr. President, to increase and sustain public support for law enforcement and public order, geared at enrolling all of society in the fight against crime and corruption. Mr. President, we know of the zones of special operations. We know of the large investments that are made in equipment to improve the mobility and the resources that are utilized by our security forces. We know of the raft of organizations from CSJP to NYS to HOPE that has more than 20,000 individuals employed. We know of all that we have done here together as a Senate to boost the capacity for our young people to enter the JDF. And all of those things, Mr. President, must be seen within the context of Plan Secure Jamaica. Mr. President, as we move forward, we must also always rely on empirical data and competent professionals so that our decisions are smart and our decisions are sensible decisions for the country. And Mr. President, we are acting on the advice of the security forces, those professionals that have been trained and that have the responsibility, Mr. President, of providing the recommendations in this regard. And they have advised that they require the extension of these emergency powers And so it is put to this Honourable Senate to vote, having the state of public emergency in the geographical area comprising the parishes St. James, Westmoreland and Hanover remain in force for a further 3 months following the expiration of the current period, as has been requested by these competent professionals and as is supported by empirical data. Mr. President, over the period January 18, 2018 to January 31, 2019, a state of public emergency was declared for the parish of St. James. There we saw a reduction of 70% as it relates to murders. Let me say that again. Mr. President, a reduction of 70% as it relates to murders. Mr. President, the premature end of the state of public emergency in St. James had a negative effect, which was reflected in a resurgence of violent crime and gang activity in that parish. These factors, Mr. President, contributed to the declaration of another state of public emergency on the 30th of April 2019. And this state of public emergency applies collectively to the entire parishes of St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover, each of which represents a police division but collectively form one contiguous area of operations. And our Prime Minister painstakingly, Mr. President, has articulated and communicated time and time again that our effort is to ensure that as we move forward with these measures, that we improve how we are delivering these measures. We started by ensuring, Leader, that the security forces were trained. And we moved on to ensure that there were facilities to allow for complaints to be made and reasonably and appropriately evaluated. We moved then to listen to the voices of the people and to respect the comments and complaints of those officials, for instance, the public defender, who had concern with some of the conditions and made the necessary adjustments, and thereafter heard and saw the said persons saying and acknowledging that there have been improvements of which they themselves are pleased. Mr. President, let's look on the numbers. Since the implementation of the state of public emergency over the period 30th of April 2019 to the 21st of July 2019, murders and shootings in the parish of St. James have reduced by 40 and 27% respectively when compared to the equivalent period 5th of February 2019 to the 29th of April 2019 prior to the declaration. Mr. President, we are not able to challenge the facts, and we don't come here to throw facts in any arrogant way. We come here to put the facts to our senators, our colleagues, so that we can move beyond the veil and look on the facts and statistics for what they are. It proves and establishes, Mr. President, that the measures are effective. And when the measures are removed, it shows the reverse impact. What it also does, Mr. President, is supports the notion that as we know it may take 100 years for a tree to grow, it may take only 10 minutes for you to cut it down. The process, Mr. President and colleagues, of developing a space in this country where the rule of law and order can prevail will not be one that will occur in an instant. It will require a determination, a dedication, and a consistency of purpose and fixity of purpose if we are to achieve those goals. Mr. President, murders and shootings in the parish of Westmoreland have reduced by 74%, and 70% when compared to the equivalent period 5th of February to 29th of April 2019. prior to the declaration. Murders and shootings in the parish of Hanover have reduced by 33 and 80% when compared to the equivalent period 5th of February to 29th of April 2019 prior to the declaration. Mr. President, again, we are here as leaders with a purpose that is collective. The people of Jamaica are more important than any color that we can wear or associate with. Mr. President, notwithstanding these gains, the tri-parish region continues to raise significant security concerns nationally, despite the reductions in murders and shootings which have been achieved since the start of the state of public emergency. The aggregate number of murders within the specified area has remained way too high. Cumulatively, the three parishes have accounted, Mr. President, for 20% of the murders committed throughout the country over the period 1st of January to the 21st of July 2019. The high figures with respect to murders in relation to the population follow a trend. In 2017, St. James recorded, Mr. President, the highest number of murders in relation to population, 183 per 100,000, while Westmoreland and Hanover were ranked as having the second and third highest rates, with 101 and 87 per 100,000 respectively. See these, Mr. President, not just as numbers. Consider yourself looking on all of the faces. 101, 87, and others. Put yourself in the position of being that father, that mother, that husband, that wife, that son, that daughter, that neighbor, that witness. In the following year, 2018, Westmoreland recorded the highest number of murders in relation to the population with 97 per 100,000 persons, while Hanover and St. James were ranked second and fourth, with 84 and 55 per 100,000 respectively. With reference, Mr. President, to the globally recognized measures of homicides in relation to population, and that is again per 100,000, the three parishes featured prominently year to date on both an individual and a collective basis, as well as the 2.5-year period spanning 1st of January 2017 to the 22nd of July 2019. Mr. President, for that period, St. James, Westmoreland, and Hanover were ranked as the 6th, 7th, and 10th parishes in terms of murders committed, with 42, 36, and 29 per 100,000 inhabitants respectively, and projected to be 75, 65, and 51 murders by the year, should there be no abatement. Mr. President, our Prime Minister has been clear in his effort to ensure that the fight against criminality is one that is approached with a certainty and with an understanding that we must first dissect this complex problem. What is crime? How is it distinct from violence? What are the roots of these issues? How are we going to approach this in terms of partnership? Mr. President, the current period of the state of public emergency is slated to end, as we know, on the 29th of July. And we are here requesting an extension of 90 days. And this is with the intent, Mr. President, of achieving the impact. And we hope that it is an extensive and enduring impact to abate the violence in the declared areas. Mr. President, we will speak on the collaboration that's required, on the fact that we have a most functional, if not the most functional, National Security Council, of which the opposition sits, and other bodies of which the opposition participates. And it is critical, because if we are going to impact crime and violence in a sustainable way, government in that regard must mean all of us, not just some of us. Mr. President, I will leave the other matters for closing. And at this time, I will call on members of this Honourable Senate to acknowledge that there is going to be resistance. There is going to always be retaliation from criminals who are being dislocated, who are being targeted, who are being dragged out of the dark and into the light. And we, Mr. President, must give support to the security forces who have asked, who are beckoning for this extension, this tool, to be utilized as an effective strategy, as has been initiated, to reduce murders and to reduce crime and violence across our country. I commend it to my colleagues, Mr. President, and I invite them to make their contributions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Charles. Senator Knight.
Thank you, colleagues. President, this is the same old, nothing new. Same story over and over again. Same faces. And when I look at some of the faces, quite frankly, I know there can't be any change. It's not possible. Not possible. The only time there can be a change is when you change the government and you change the sycophants. That's the only time there can be change. And in this chamber, it's made up of sycophants. You know, two ways about that. So we come and we hear how wonderful the government is doing. And we say how no, I'm not a sycophant, and that's known. If one of you over there, one, just adopt the same approach I adopt to my party affiliation, you will be kicked out of the Senate. It happened before, where you were supposed to exercise independence, but you sign a letter that says if you disagree with what your leader says, you gave him the authority to take that letter to the Governor General as your resignation. And had it not been for an independent judiciary, two would have been denied their place in the Senate. So when I say sycophants, I'm not talking out the side of my mouth. I wish you could think for three sides. Your side, this side, and the people. I am the people. I am the people. When you pass a law in here for the people, you're passing a law for me too. For me too. And that is a part of our problem. That you don't think you're passing laws for yourselves that should govern how you behave. You don't. And that is a major part of the problem. You exempt yourselves from the laws you pass. And so you breach them with impunity. And I will tell you this. You come each time and you say, this thing is temporary. But every single time, sometimes you must listen. You are to listen sometimes without chatting. Listen without chatting. If you know what I am going to say, keep your mouth shut. You have too much mouth. You have too much mouth. Not when I'm speaking, I'm supposed to be heard in silence. And I'm now asking you to cause him to shut up so I can be heard in silence.
I will ask you to address the president.
I ask
and
you,
don't forget.
The president.
Then address me. Don't address Senator Brem.
I look directly into your two eyes and says, I am asking you to cause me to be able to speak in silence. In silence. Instead of grinning, I expect you to act. Thanks. I heard some announcement from the Prime Minister, which said he had this wonderful plan, anti-crime plan, the best since independence. I don't think the Prime Minister is in a position to say that, because I don't think there's any Jamaican who would believe that he has read every plan since independence. He hasn't. And the country is waiting on a plan. Can't continue like this. Each new morn new widows howl, new orphans cry. And there is nothing that this government can do other than a state of emergency. Is there no other balm in Gilead? This is an inept government made up of inept individuals. It is a combination of ineptitude and corruption. And when there is that combination, then the country is doomed. doomed. They can't discipline their own. They can't prevent their own from engaging in criminal activity. How are they going to engage members of the public from behaving in criminal activity? Because some of the people in the country see representatives of government as criminals themselves. So they're in the same barrel. They're in the same barrel, they're acting together. And then they come and speak about a state of emergency and how wonderful it is working. How wonderful. It's a crying shame that for so long they have been unable to present to the people of Jamaica a comprehensive anti-crime plan. And saying that there exists one that is the best since independence can't work, because it would be a guarded secret. There's no Jamaican who can articulate this plan that is the best since independence. Not the person who said it exists, not the person who is supposed to implement it, and not anyone else who mouths the same. There's no plan. And yet the country is being asked to give support. Give support to what you don't know? This government is a sham. Those who pretend to be busy at governmental work, they are little puppets manipulated by some unseen puppeteer. And they come. If you open your mouth again, I'm going to shut mine. You're not going to be speaking when I am. I must be heard in silence. You know, one of the things that always fascinates me is when I hear people, when there are discussions about others' lives, when you hear them laughing and you see them grinning, and you understand how callous those are. These are people who Shakespeare described as wretches of the earth. Callous. They don't care about people. They don't. They don't. What are those? Shakespeare are so withered and so wild that look not like the inheritance of the earth, and yet are on it. Are on it. Why is it that they don't care? Why is it that they can't show that they care for poor people of this country? Why is it they feel happy when they move from 180 dead to 178 or 105? They seem happy. You must still be concerned about those who have been murdered and do something, for goodness sake. You're patting yourselves on the back and think you're doing a wonderful job, admitting of not one new thought as to how to approach this problem. Mind locked, sealed, impervious to any suggestion from any quarter of goodwill. Private sector organization of Jamaica wanting to help, eager to help, you lock them out.
Shame. Churches.
The doors of the churches are open. The pastors would like to pass through and sit with you all in your corridors. But you have them not. You know it all. And all you're doing is continuing your contribution to the death of innocent citizens. Your action may seem to be well guided, but the truth is it has murderous consequences. And it is the consequences that we are to be concerned with. Because if your good intent curbs nothing, then you are useless, especially in circumstances where you will not admit of the need for change. And so, President, this is like a chorus. They come with emptiness. They leave with emptiness. And their achievement is emptiness. But their comfort level is satisfied. And it is satisfied because of a reason. Because of a reason. It is satisfied because they care not. They care not. One senator had taken me on for that. I demonstrated caring, doing something, trying something. These don't care. All they can do is laugh amongst each other whilst we try to find solutions. And if one solution is suggested, they don't have the desire to even look at it, let alone implement it, because they think they know it all. And yet, they are enveloped in their own ignorance. I weep. I weep for my country. I weep for my people. And I weep for the government. Because that is what it is in name, and name only. It governs not because it knows not how to govern. But those who make it up will pat themselves on the back. And they will chant among themselves and say how great they are. How great they are. And when they leave here, they will feel that they have achieved so much, and yet the results, when examined, show so little. But the pleasure on their faces is something to behold. How happy they are for how great they have been. How happy they are for how great they have been. And yet, the blood of Jamaicans continue to flow. And their heart skips not a beat. It is a crying shame.
Thank you, Senator Knight. Senator Samuda.
Mr. President, permission to speak from a seat, not my own. I will be brief, but I wish to make a couple points because we have had this debate previously. We have had this debate previously, and even as recently as last week. There is a point Senator Charles has made several times in all of the debates that relate to national security. He has often called on us on this side and on your side to walk with him or walk and make arrangements to go through the communities where these measures have been implemented. It's a call that we all should take. I recall last year when we visited St. James and we toured the detention facilities and we toured the checkpoints and we were able to speak with the police, the private sector, those perhaps not skinny, but those that those that ran cook shops. We went on the ground. We spoke to ordinary citizens. We spoke to persons of varying economic, social backgrounds. And their call was simple, that they wanted us to continue with the state of emergency. I have recently done the same thing again in St. James, and I've also taken the time to do the same in areas of St. Andrew South. And it is because of these trips that I rise today, not just to support, but to ask my colleagues to do the same on your side. It is the sense of security and the sense of hope that things will improve and things will get better that they feel because of the measures which have been implemented, which you should vote for. There's a context that we should look at, right? I think it is a I think it's not even a thought. There can be no argument that along the way, since independence, there have been successes and there have been some mistakes made, especially as it relates to national security. I think it was a mistake on our part in 2002 when we didn't support the amendment brought by then Prime Minister P.J. Patterson to the Defence Act. I think the wording of it required amendment, but the general intention was the right intention. Now, to jog your memory, that referred to the amendment to, I believe it was Section 9 of the Principal Act, and it was the amendments were really looking at how you allowed the JDF to augment and support the work of the JCF. It still required the same order that would have had to be issued by the Prime Minister through the Ministry of National Security, but it spoke to their ability to detain persons and how they could police and how they could go into situations where there were, spikes and concerns. Prime Minister Patterson then said, "It is the view of the government and the law officers of the Crown that in light of the current security environment and the expanded role that is being assigned to the JDF in the conduct of operations pursuant to the provisions of Section 9, that in addition to the immunities, privileges and protections similar to the JCF, which is now enjoyed by the JDF, it should be made abundantly clear that those powers are shared by them." Now what's important is in that year, we had 1,045 Jamaicans lose their life to murder. It was 2002. It was, every Jamaican losing their life to murder is something we should cry about. But the situation then was at 1,045. The fact is, that situation caused deep enough concern to then Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Peter Phillips, where he wanted the additional role of the soldiers. You wanted them to be able to detain persons without the support of the JCF. So there was a need for greater detention. Now, albeit it didn't go as far as the regulations give the power to do with a state of emergency, but the situation was not as bad. The concern was not as chronic. The fact is, since that time, we have had years where murder went over 1,600, 60% above where we were then. So if a problem got as much as 60% worse, one would argue, or could argue, that you needed even more than the 60% more measures and more severity to deal with it. Prime Minister Patterson also said in that debate, and it was interesting to read the exchange between himself and former Prime Minister Edward Seaga. The parliamentary craft was quite something to see compared to, in some cases, to some of the debates that we have now. But he said, first, the criminals simply lie low, and they wait for 48 or 72 hours, in the case may be, and the security forces withdraw. Secondly, as a consequence of this, there is no opportunity of building up of any trust or any confidence between the security forces and the residents in communities. Which is why, when the security forces, through the head of the army and the head of the police, asked us to continue and to vote to extend the states of emergencies in St. James last year, we should have. And it is a mistake that we made. So I started by saying I believe it was a mistake for us not to support this in 2002. I believe it is a mistake for us not to have gotten the support of the opposition towards the latter part of 2018 in the support of that extension. Because the fact is, the situation and severity of it called for it, and that is my position. What I can't ascertain from it, and I'm sorry Senator Knight had stepped out, I see where a committee was set up to look at the amendments proposed by the opposition then. What I haven't been able to ascertain, Madam Clerk, is whether that committee ever met. Because I requested information from the committee section and no record of it could be found, which suggests to me it didn't meet, which I think is If it indeed did not meet, because I wasn't able to get in contact with any other members of said committee, that would have been a shame. But I'd have loved to have heard from. Sorry? Well, you would have had enough to have quorum, so the committee could have met. The point is that there's no evidence of the committee meeting, and that would have been a shame. So I'd love to know if indeed they did meet, because it would be indeed unfortunate. But that being said, that was a concern then. That was a concern then, and that was a recommended approach from the then government then. But where are we now? Yes. We are in a situation where since 2015, when you look at the year-to-date numbers, 2019 over 2015, you're trending up with murders and shooting. Murder is actually up, trending 11% when compared to the 2015 year. And why I look at that, I've seen several security ministers over my years watching the parliamentary process always speak to the fact that we have to look at the trends over a period of time. So it's good to look at a 4-year running average. But what else has happened in that 4-year period? What was the situation? What was the general environment in 2015? Let's look at it. In 2015, we would have just started to see the benefits of the implementation of the IMF program, but unemployment at that stage was at 13.5%. Today it is at 7.8%. Since then, the poverty rate is declining and relative salaries are increasing. However, what's interesting, the conventional wisdom, and you hear it, in very casual and light conversation, give people jobs and crime will fall. Now, this actually supports that, and I tell you why, because accusatory crimes have declined 44% when you compare it over the 4-year period, which is very similar to the fall in the rate of unemployment. So that actually supports that notion. So you say to yourself, well, how did we attack? What's the reasons for the success? Because you'd love if murder was down 44% as well. So you want to look at what worked to bring down one category of crime and what hasn't worked, so that you're able to bring that across. And you say, well, okay, you attacked some of the underlying factors, the deep need for income and the poverty rate, which should have been increasing at that time. And you've brought that down, and it has helped you reduce accusatory crimes. Now, serious and violent crimes have only marginally gone down. Nothing to celebrate. It's down 3.2% last week. It looked like it was about flat. Some reports I've seen, it goes up and down, but generally it's really flat, which is concerning when you consider that your serious and violent crimes are around flat. But one of your categories within serious and violent crimes is down 30% over that 4-year period, and that is rape. So we had discussion last week about really what the incidence of rape was, and I need to make that point. Over the 4-year period, year-to-date numbers show a trending down of rape. Now this is good. So we look at, okay, what has been done in that area, and no issues acknowledging that some of the work that would have been done by the Division of Gender Affairs across the period and across administrations has borne fruit, because there's been deep social intervention where you had abusive situations in many cases, and these abusive situations, as the JCF's own data show, in many cases ended in rape, unfortunately. So there is a success across administrations with bringing that down. So you say, well, if rape is down 30% and you're still just flat in the category of serious and violent crimes, what's going up? And we all know that there's been an increase in shootings and murder. Those are the two big categories that have generally affected the country negatively. Now, when we look at, last week we extended the state of emergency in St. Andrew South Police Division, and when I looked at the statistics that would have come out, just under 100 persons have been murdered since the start of the year in that police division. When you look at the numbers in St. James, we're in a fight against time, because you still haven't brought the numbers down, albeit the fact that you're comparing it with a SOE period where you'd have started the year without an SOE in place. So it's not comparing apples and apples. But you're in a race against time to save additional lives. And the fact is the security forces have requested additional time. Now, sorry, Senator Crawford not here, because I enjoyed sections of his presentation last week. The major point of difference was his analysis of the situation and as it related to the numbers on rape. But he spoke to looking at the root causes. So if the major issue or where you're not having the success that you want is with gun-related crime that results in murder, you say, well, let's look at the root causes. And there are three documents that I'd encourage my colleagues to take a look at so that it even informs some of the debate that we have over future national security legislation. And one is the Vanderbilt University study on violent crime in the region. I believe it is from 2010. There's also an updated one, I think, from 2016, which also speaks to some of the changes in the space. The other is the UN Habitat study of 2010, which looks at the root causes of crime, specifically in rural and urban Jamaica. But that makes some very interesting recommendations, and it points to a success that many of us would remember. We'd remember what the crime situation would have been in Grand Spen in 1997. What was it that was done there, and are we replicating those efforts now? What the UN Habitat report says, Grand Spen using the crime prevention through environmental design approach. In the Grand Spen model, changes were made to improve the image and aesthetics of health and policing facilities. Now, why that's important, colleagues, is because we're also doing that now. There is virtually no week you can't see some cutting of some ribbon, some ceremony or handover of health centers right across the length and breadth of the country. There's virtually no week that you can't see the upgrade and remodeling and renovation of police positions in the space. So you see a victory that you would have had in Grand Spen, that victory is being replicated and being worked right across the country. So that's one step that you have to take. But when we consider, colleagues, that the numbers are where they are, and we consider that we've made the mistake before. We made it in 2002, that's my honest opinion. You made it in 2010 and in 2018. I ask that we don't make the same mistake again. The fact is, there are other steps that have to accompany a SOE. But those things are happening. What you have now is the largest capital budget at the Ministry of National Security, putting in the investment that we so desperately need. Which brings me to a point Senator Brown would have made last week. He mentioned an issue with a scanner or some X-ray scanners, and he spoke to delivery or what the issue was there. What my own checks found was what you spoke to was the value of the contract versus what had been disbursed. You mentioned in the range of 16 million, which depending on the exchange rate would be pretty close to where it was. Only $30,000 have been disbursed.
Senator Skeffrey.
Come on, Senator Skeffrey.
Senator Skeffrey, I must encourage you to take Senator Knight's recommendation so Senator Samuda can speak in silence.
Senator Skeffrey can talk, man. He can go and give me the vote. He can go and give us a vote. So that's good. But there are no scanners that are unaccounted for. Scanner is being tested because of the amount of radiation that it releases, and they're trying to develop a protocol as well as the associated equipment that has to be used with it, because it's unclear how this new technology works. Well, that's the information. I have documentary evidence to support. What's also interesting, and what you didn't bring up, what's also interesting is you didn't bring up who actually got the contract, which is a former candidate, a former two-time candidate of the People's National Party. And I don't know. So but there's the thing. The machine is not unaccounted for. So we need to be accurate if we're going to. When there are issues, Senator Brown, you have my support to call them out. But in this case, is just not an issue. It's 2018 March that the payment was made in. The contract was signed in 2018 and a payment of 30,000 US came in March 2018, and I have a copy of the documents. I'm not asking. No problem, but I'm talking about that one because you brought that up. We soon come to that. The point is, machine is not unaccounted for. And it's one tranche of the total contract value that has been released, and you're developing the accompanying protocols before you spend any more money. So we just need to be accurate. When there's issues, call them out, keep us accountable. However, when there's not issues, let's just be accurate. That's all I'm asking for. No, but if I wouldn't bring it up if we hadn't done the checks and the checks didn't show that. Yeah, but you call it out and you should. You should. Either way. Either way. Senator Skeffrey go vote for me, so I'm not quarrel with him a shout across the aisle. Hear what we say now. We are in a position where murder is still... No, I'm closing. We're in a situation where murder and violent crime, especially as it relates to gun crime and gangs, is still too high. There are some areas which these gangs operate in more than others. The government has taken the decision to declare the states of emergency in these areas because we are going after them. So I am asking you to give me the vote, and I'm happy that you will do so. No, I'm closing. And I'm thankful that you will support it because the people of St. James, of Hanover, of Westmoreland, and of the Kingston South Police Division, thank you for supporting it. And I thank you. I close, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Samuda. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, every time we come to do this, I am challenged. When I was sworn into the Senate, I saw it as an opportunity to give service to my country in what I describe as the last chapter of my life. When I took the oath to uphold the Constitution, it was beyond my comprehension that I would be called upon so many times to breach it. You know, Mr. President, I have great challenge, great difficulty understanding how persons can actually spin a spin to say that what we are doing here is within the confines of the Constitution. I have a great difficulty. I have a greater difficulty when I hear the Prime Minister say that this is a crime-fighting tool which he wants to use for 5 to 7 years. And one of the things that I think needs to be done is that this matter needs to be taken out of partisan political discussions. And perhaps it is an urgent matter on which the court will have to rule. You see, Mr. President, Sir Alexander Bustamante used this state of emergency once. Prime Minister Michael Manley used it once. Prime Minister Bruce Golding used it once. And our post-independence Prime Minister has turned it into a crime-fighting tool. And the narrative which is emerging is a disturbing narrative, because a narrative which you hear time and time again is a count-off of how many lives have been saved. So it's being justified because we said, look, we saved 30 lives. Look, we saved 50 lives. And taking comfort in statistics like that is actually almost acclaiming a success rather than analyzing the problem in the way that it's deserving of analysis. You see, I sit here all the time and I hear the condemnation of the opposition by saying, oh, the state of emergency was brought to a premature end after 1 year. After 1 year, that it was brought to a premature end.
And the whole world gone.
And immediately after this premature end, murders trended up in St. James. So what about an analysis of it to see if the end was premature? Or as we cautioned time and time again, you're suppressing crime, suppressing figures, and the criminals are simply waiting you out. But the narrative, the spin is so strong and so well crafted that nobody, it seems, takes into account the other possibilities. And that is why the Prime Minister has to use it as a crime-fighting tool for 5 years.
7 years.
And then to 7 years, according to him, because that's the only way that the narrative can be sustained. You have to keep it there because you have to keep on suppressing the figures. Well, let me tell you something. If that is the approach which has been taken, you're underestimating the criminals. And if you underestimate the criminals in this country, you cannot respond to them effectively. Now, let me tell Senator Samuda that I also carry out and have the discussions, but I went a little further than you did. I asked the citizens, what is it that you like about the state of emergency? And the answer was so simple and so clear. We like the police, the presence of the police and the soldiers in our community. Now, I'm not one for having soldiers out there all the time, you know. Because when you do that, and you have soldiers on the street all the time, you are actually impacting the role of the military. And I don't think that should be a permanent state. I think that when people see soldiers on the street, they must know that it's serious business that we are talking about. But in a way, I'm almost, as I said on the last occasion, because it's almost like you could say, look at the Hansard and read the speeches. I almost have a bit of sympathy for the Prime Minister. Because as is said over and over again, we are acting on the recommendation of the security forces. We are not doing this by ourselves. We are doing what the security forces recommend. And it seems as though in Jamaica now, those people who lead the forces have one recommendation: a state of emergency. In fact, at the editors' forum, when the Commissioner of Police was being interviewed, he said that there are people who are now coming to look at the formula of a state of emergency. In fact, he couldn't even remember where in Atlanta they were coming from. And he said, oh, this county is near the airport. But they are so fascinated by how the state of emergency is being utilized in Jamaica that they are coming to Jamaica to see it. One shudders. One shudders to hear the Commissioner of Police make a remark like that. And it wasn't always so. I have sat and I've tried to analyze why it is. Is it because he has a military background? But then I have to think about what former Chief of Staff and Commissioner of Police Hardly Lewin said. And in a letter to the editor in January 22nd, 28, I want to read some parts of it. It says that a state of emergency is the ultimate tool in the law enforcer's toolbox. When taken from that box, it must be used for the shortest time possible and must be a first step in a bigger overall plan. He goes on to discuss other aspects of the state of emergency, but he serves us this caution. We must resist the temptation to pull this tool, even when urged to do so by popular opinion. We cannot run the risk of having our state of emergency turning into a farce. We are already past that stage. When I went down to Montego Bay, was it like 2 weeks ago? I didn't even know that we had reached upon a checkpoint. The two young soldiers baked by the sun because the sun was pelting hot. Were just out there. They obviously didn't even have the energy to do a check. You would never drive through St. James and believe there's a state of emergency. And there are people who say that certain people in St. James don't even remember there's a state of emergency. They're so unaffected. When you see some fest in a state of emergency, and they turn off, they say, no, we have to turn off at 6 o'clock or 7:35 in the morning, you understand what it has become. And you understand how it is that there are more than 2 Jamaicas now. Because the poor man on the corner say, I am suffering, I can't make no money because I have to close down so early. The hairdressers are saying, I can't make any money because by the time the people are coming from work to come to my hairdressing parlor, it's time for me to close. You hear the bartender say, boy, sometimes I turn off the light and I serve a drink. But since the police know that that is what he's doing, that don't last more than 20 minutes. And I'm cautioning the government, although I know they will not listen, because I know they do not listen, that they need to begin to take a very serious look at what they are solving and what they are creating. Finally, I say, Mr. President, that recent events have demonstrated that this focus on the state of emergency is making us miss many opportunities. I recall how exultant the police force was when they say that we have arrested 24 of 33 alleged gang members of the One Don gang.
Landmark investigation, they say.
When the time came for them to go to court, 17 people were brought to the court. When the time came for the judge to look at the matter, there were no documents before the court. When he protested and documents were brought, only documents for 10 persons. So 7 had to be returned. That could not have been proper investigation. When the matter is finally before the court, the judge realizes that 16 statements are outstanding. And you see the inequities in a society where some people can't get arrested because the investigations are not complete and there are statements outstanding and you need to send it back, and others are put before the court. 24 supposed to be, 17 actually placed, 10 with documents, and 16 statements are outstanding because investigations are not complete. And you expect the society to look on at all these injustices and feel that this government really cares about their plight, or that there's equality in the way that the justice system treats everybody, and you don't expect resentment, and you don't expect criminality to increase? Mr. President, Senator Samuda has invited us to look at some documents, and I'm going to invite him to look at the Auditor General's report on the Jamaica Constabulary Force. It's dated April 2019. And when you do that, because I'm beginning now to see that you are sincere about some of these matters, and I respect that, I want you to share it, to bring it to your government's attention, so that they can see how April 2019, the Auditor General's report on the Jamaica Constabulary Force. I'm not going to go into it on this occasion. Mr. President, there has to be another way. There has to be another way. When I was first appointed to the Senate, I had the pleasure and the distinction and honor of serving with a man called Freddie Rattray. He's the one who has scarred me for life. Because when I saw Freddie Rattray get up and send back legislation passed by his own, which was before the Senate, from his own government, and say, you have to look back at that. Fix it. Fix it. There was no way that anything he did, that he approached in a partisan manner. He put the country at the centerpiece of whatever he did and had no reluctance in sending back any piece of legislation which he did not consider appropriate. Oh, for those days, they will never return. So, Mr. President, we are here again today. And at the rate it is going, it seems that when I do write my memoirs, I will have a list of the times that I've had to compromise my own beliefs in trying to assist the government in charting a course where they compromise the Constitution daily, simply because I don't see any choice, simply because I don't see another way, simply because there's a dearth of ideas, and all we can do is pull from the toolbox something called a state of emergency, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. Senator Charles.
Colleagues, I thank you for your contributions, and as I close, I note the comments of Senator Scott Motley. And let me just say, in the again, I think I've said it at every opportunity that we've discussed these issues, that it is not difficult to appreciate the concerns of the opposition. And though they may sometimes be articulated in ways which I don't agree with, or that I think might be inflammatory, moving through all of that, it is critical that as we implement measures of this nature, that we still have the checks and balances to guide us in the right direction. But I want to assure you that what the Prime Minister and government have put forward is not a state of emergency that can be properly compared as similar to those before it. It is a state of emergency that, when seen accurately and within the context of all that has been done to improve it and to establish it as you rightfully say, as a tool to save lives, and a tool that has garnered the support and the confidence of so many of our citizens because of the way that it has been implemented. Now, an important point. We all can agree. Is this the best thing since sliced bread? Is this something that everybody would want to have every day in every community? The answer is clearly no. But we are searching for solutions in this country. And we must be truthful in saying that as we look on the complexity of the crime monster, what has been put forward to cauterize the bleeding and to respond to the calls of the people, this is the most effective measure that has been utilized to treat with murders in our country ever before, as it has been operated. Now, we have learned many lessons, and we have improved the way that the security forces have operated and guided the policy decisions and revisions of how we execute these states of emergencies. And cumulatively, all of these have added value to the effectiveness of these measures. Mr. President, there are some indisputable facts. Through these actions, lives have been saved. Several lives have been saved. And I note the leader of opposition business making reference to the government's repeated communication of lives being saved. But it is perhaps, Senator Gale, the most inimical litmus test. Because without life, there is nothing else. And if we are to look on the primary responsibility of government, it boils down to us having to save lives in order to do anything else. That is not to say that there is not more to be done. But in response, I also have to just reiterate and reaffirm that we have to listen to the security forces. And at this time, I think we must thank the security forces who have been out there, and as you have said, they're out there in the pelting sun. They're out there doing what we don't want to do. They're trained to do so. And one of the things that we have to do, President, one of the things we have to do as we acknowledge the security forces is we have to also make reference to the fact that we must listen to them. And we're not listening to them because the government has become a proxy for soldiers. We move forward to listen to the security forces, Mr. President, because they are competent professionals that are trained and that are fitted with the capacity to guide our Prime Minister and the government in the right direction of what they require in order to carry out their responsibility. Mr. President, collaboration is key, and I thank my colleagues for all that they have said. All of the considerations, all of the remarks will be considered. I want to highlight for Senator, I think it is Senator Knight or Senator Brown, who spoke about the churches. And just to highlight that the Partnership for a Prosperous Jamaica, which serves as the formal framework for the discussion of national issues, including the matters relating to crime as well, includes the opposition, it includes the private sector, it includes civil society, includes the churches, academia, youth representatives, and several other important stakeholders. And we also note that on top of the most functional National Security Council that the Prime Minister presides over, that the Prime Minister has instructed the Cabinet Secretary to set up a committee to develop the framework for a crime management oversight body, similar to EPOC, that will also include a cross-section of representatives from various interest groups, and that will be having the objective of refining and approving the next Partnership for a Prosperous Jamaica meeting coming in September. There have also been several engagements between our Jamaica Constabulary Force and several stakeholders across the country, community groups, churches, and others. And we've met with private sector. So I say that because it is important to let all colleague senators know, because a comment was made, sort of, about not meeting with churches. And I know that not only have we had met with them as an administration, but the security forces have also met separately. This is a complex matter, colleagues. It's not a matter that can be treated with as an isolated solution. It's complex criminal issues. And so I am hoping that we will move to support this, because whether you believe it is the most effective or not, what is your alternative? Please, let me say it again. Last two things I say, I've always said it. Senator Samuda, you echoed the call again. Come, let us go on the ground and see it in operation. Take a day, go through. I have been there for more than 6 hours, and you will understand what is taking place. Speak to the soldiers, speak to the police, speak to the people. Lastly, we, the government of Jamaica, welcome all recommendations on any alternative that can be better than what we've put forward to create the kind of results that we have. This is not a brag and a boast. This is an invitation for collaboration. If you, the opposition, if you stakeholders have solutions that can work, bring them, come. We want to work together with you in partnership to solve the problems for our people. Am I correct, Senators? Correct. And with that, I rest. I thank you.
Leader. I'll suspend the session for about 5 minutes. The leader has matters to discuss. I put the motion for a vote. Those in favor? Yes, I know. The clerk will 5 minutes are up, Senator. That's right. The Senate is back in session. We're now going to have the vote name by name. Thank you, clerk.
Senator Graham, Senator Brown, Senator Charles,
Yes.
Senator Crawford, Senator Fraser Binns, Senator Gale, Senator Horton, Senator Hill, Senator Johnson Smith, Senator Knight, Senator Longmore, Senator Morgan, Senator Morris, Senator Morrison, Senator Samuda, Senator Scott Motley, Senator Sinclair, Senator Skeffrey, Senator Webby, Senator Williams, Senator Knight. No, it wasn't Senator Knight. It was who said that? Who said it?
Senator Brown.
Senator Brown.
I count 13 yes, one abstention. I will give a yes, quite reluctantly, just to allow it to pass.
So I think that was a yes. Okay. Senator Brown. That's yes. Just clarifying.
Senators, the result is as follows. We have 14 ayes, 1 declined, that's an abstention, and there are 6 absent. So the vote carries. Motion carries. We have that resubmission of reports and committees. Sorry.
Oh, your mistake. Sorry.
Mr. President, I beg to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the report of the Senate Regulations Committee on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Longville Housing Park Development Phase 2A Order 2019 and a copy of the report of the Senate Regulations Committee on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Marysfield Housing Development Order 2019.
Notices of motions given.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motions. Be it resolved that the report of the Senate Regulations Committee on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Longville Park Housing Development Phase 2A Order 2019 be adopted, and be it resolved that the report of the Senate Regulations Committee on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Marysfield Housing Development Order 2019 be adopted.
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Can you put the motion, please, Mr. President?
Sorry. I put the motion that the
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll proceed no further with that matter at this time. Mr. President, if I may, and again, my apologies for absence earlier this morning, but again, I am so pleased and proud to have a colleague as able as Senator Charles Jr. to, of course, have taken us through the important matters already completed for the day. Mr. President, if you would allow me to express or appreciation for the support just given to the state of emergency by members of the opposition, despite what has clearly been expressed to be a difficult decision for them. But we appreciate the support, and I'm sure the people of Jamaica appreciate the support as well. Mr. President, I would wish to move for suspension of the standing orders to take the resolution of which Senator Charles gave notice earlier. This is a matter in relation to the pensions, superannuation funds and retirement schemes investment amendment regulations 2019. I wish to raise a point, Mr. President. I know that there was a concern expressed by the opposition when I pointed out to the Leader of Opposition Business that the notice, or rather that a notice had been given. I had not realized that the agenda in error had said that it would be tabled and not taken. And why I did not realize this, Mr. President, was certainly because they had been tabled last week. And accordingly, this was clearly a typographical error and is certainly of some regret. What I would like to propose, because I do recognize that, that there are members who are concerned about not having read through the regulations that were tabled last week, is that rather than the very brief introduction, which I would otherwise have proposed, that I did request and have received a more detailed presentation which would assist the opposition members in walking through the regulations, the key issues. Mr. President, these regulations have been a work in progress since 2017. They're intended to not only provide for greater returns for our pensioners, but they're also intended to provide a new source of potential funding for entrepreneurs through the increased scope and flexibility which pension funds will now have, or rather trustees will now have, to invest pension funds with. Mr. President, it is in this context that I ask for suspension of the standing orders to allow me to take the motion, notice of which was given earlier.
Mr. President,
Senator
I think it is fair to say that I always extend my cooperation whenever it's possible. The leader has quite correctly stated that we were totally unaware that this matter would be taken today. She has spoken to me. She has reminded me that we cannot amend the regulations. But I did request a courtesy. In fact, it was put to us that we would have to return here after Emancipation Day to take this matter. And we elected to do so because I believe that we have a duty to at least know, to read through these regulations. And I do not find that that is an unreasonable request, especially coming in circumstances where we normally try to accommodate the government as much as possible. I had the opportunity to look at it. I explained to her that none of us had done so. And there are 28 clauses. It's not a two-page document. And I do believe that the opposition ought to be given the level of respect to say, if we are doing the government's business, if we are doing the people's business, at least let us have an opportunity to read through it. I don't think it is sufficient that there's going to be a detailed explanation. I think that we should be allowed to read through it. And I've said so to the leader.
Mr. President, this is really not intended to be a matter of contention between both sides. And I am regretful. Now, they were tabled last week. So the fact that they have not been read is not that they have not been tabled appropriately in accordance with the standing orders. And while it is that there was an error on the notice sent out, the fact is that we don't normally put regulations on an agenda unless they are going to be taken, meaning that mere tabling of regulations doesn't usually take place. And I know that it would be, in a perfect world, it would, of course, be my desire to ensure that we would adjourn and allow you to read. But neither myself nor Minister Charles are available next week, which would mean that we would be putting off again what has been a work in progress already. The pension funds have been hoping for these to be able to change their models. They were tabled in February and withdrawn for further consultations and work, which has been done, stress assessments done. We had regional support on the matter. There was a broader FSC financial services assessment plan undertaken, and there are opportunities which can be unlocked. I would just ask that we proceed with the work of the Senate as we are all here, and the matter could proceed with, as we go through with the explanation. The technical people are here. They are willing to answer questions if questions arise, but I would ask that we really just stick to the business of the day and complete these regulations which were tabled last week.
Mr. President, I want to appeal to the leader of government business in the Senate. She wasn't here this morning to see the cooperation on the bill we had. She wasn't here to see that, but we cooperated. We cooperated on the state of emergency. What worried me is that we had a state of emergency, a state of emergency discussion a while ago. When that state of emergency expires on or around Tuesday, it could have been taken last week had the government planned properly. They clearly didn't plan properly, so we're at the last minute we're getting this. We're guided by the agenda sent from the clerk. Every Wednesday we look to see what is it that we're going to be discussing? If the Senate is meeting, and what is it we're going to be discussing? A week or two ago, we had a backside bill which was retabled. When I saw the notice from the Senate, it says ICT, state of emergency. Then an update came later saying the pension regulation will be tabled. That's what I saw. I have priorities. So I said, since it's not going to be taken, I am not going to read it. I'm not going to be prepared for it. I am guided by what came from the Parliament. Now I'm being told, well, you should have known that it's not just going to be tabled. No, I must take as bona fide that instructions I get. That's what I take. So, Minister, I'm not prepared. And the opposition is not prepared. You have the majority. You want to run it through with your majority? Cool. But what it tells us is that you really don't want our cooperation in the issue anymore. Because that's what it's telling us. And if that's the message, you have a quorum. Use it. But for good governance, for respect for our role as senators, we appeal to you not to use your numbers and deprive us of the right to discuss the regulations and to be informed in our discussion of the regulation. So I make this appeal to you, to your colleagues, to you and your colleagues, to allow the spirit of cooperation which has enveloped today's proceedings to continue right through. If you push it through, I promise you one thing. No, I'm telling you, no, it's not a threat. I'm just telling you what the reality is. Don't count on me for future cooperation. I cooperated today and give you the 14th vote. Right? If this Senate is going to show, if you're going to show disrespect to us on this side, don't expect anything from us. So I make this appeal to you, all of you. Don't go here today. I make that appeal to all of you. Don't go here today. Don't ambush us. Don't ambush us. Because if you do that, there'll be no trust that can be displayed between us and you going forward. This Senate needs trust, it needs cooperation, and we urge you not to proceed on this today. May it please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, it is certainly not the intention of this side to ambush anyone. And of course, certainly a document which would have been tabled a week before in accordance with the standing orders could not be considered an ambush, notwithstanding an error, an administrative error, but a procedural error. But what I would like to propose, because there is the unavoidable colleagues, please,
can the leader be allowed to speak from both sides?
What I would like to propose is for us to sit at 9 on Wednesday, because the other issue that we were looking at was that there were to have been 2 Joint Select Committee meetings on Wednesday. One has been cancelled, but it is my understanding from the clerk that we could have an early sitting on Wednesday morning prior to the Joint Select, and that would allow us to take what would not be a lengthy matter, but to really have the document, to have it tabled in accordance, to have it die on the altar of an administrative error when persons have been waiting for this since 2017. No, I'm saying 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. have a quorum. Let us try and see if members can come together, sufficient numbers can come together for Wednesday morning at 9. It would allow you the sufficient time to additional time. Again, I just remind that these matters were tabled in accordance.
So what day is it that you want to come?
No, but we can't just come whenever. We have to be able to sit and work. All right. So if there are challenges, we would have preferred to try to make the accommodation next week. But if it is that you are indeed agreeing, I understand. I understand. Understood. So should we proceed? So we proceed. And again, it's not a perfect situation, but I will go through and hope that the guidance that has been provided at my will be sufficient. One second. Mr. President, I'm so pleased to advise that Minister Charles has been able to free his schedule for next Friday. So he will take the matter next Friday, and therefore the opposition will certainly have time to read. Notice has been given, and certainly if there are any other matters which we can use the time well, maybe on Friday, then that can be taken as well, as we will be here, you will be here. So it does seem like the challenge has been averted, Mr. President, and I thank Minister Charles for having made the effort. I know it wasn't an easy one, but we appreciate it. So, Mr. President, we would now then simply ask for the adjournment, and we would apologize to the technical persons who were waiting and hoping, but I know they understand that these are the vagaries of Parliament. Okay? Thank you very much.
Leader.
Sorry, Mr. President, it's just to say that it is not intended to do any further business of today, and therefore ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
And before I do that, I'm just pleased that this session ends in this kind of unity. Thank you both sides. The question is that there's no further business for the day and that the Senate should be adjourned. Those in favor? The leader said that the Senate will be adjourned, and those in favor, aye. Those against, the ayes have it. I suspect until Friday. Thank you so much.
You know, this inflation thing is a really big deal. It affects everything. Inflation determines what your money can do. So whether you're running the government, running a business, or running your household, you can't plan properly or plan for long unless inflation is low, stable, and predictable. We need a little inflation to encourage production and growth. But inflation is like your blood pressure. Can't be too high, can't be too low. Inflation is the real heartbeat of the economy.
Consumers and investors feel secure.
I'm so lonely. You're not afraid of the dark, are you? Don't be afraid. Come with me.
Please, no! Oh my God, please, no!
Sometimes it's a calm debate.
We have the responsibility not only to make laws, but to ensure that we set the goals and set the means by which we will operate to pursue our goals in Jamaica.
And so if it turns out not to be so, then there's a consequence.
sometimes it's not.
If a board member become a whistleblower.
Hear what I'm saying?
No, I hear you. And I'm sticking to
It
it.
does have nothing to do with the bill before us.
I wish to ask the member to withdraw his statement and be struck on a point of order that it is in breach of 35(5) of the standing orders. He is imputing motive to a member of the other house.
Watch PBCJ's live coverage of the sitting of the Senate, Fridays at 10 a.m. with a rebroadcast at 10 p.m. only on PBC Jamaica, the People's Station.
Long, long ago, when the good king died, an evil sorcerer named Renwick claimed the crown for himself. Young Prince Dexter ran for his life into the great forest where the kindly wizard Phineas lived. That's me. Prince Dexter became my first apprentice wizard, preparing for the day he would be king. But magic can be tricky, as he discovered when a backfiring brew created 3 little monsters, Winkle, Gump, and Boo. Three magic monsters and a young prince. I call them the